Jiva Cordia. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. This is our 61st and the last one for 2021. So good morning to you, good afternoon, wherever you are, good evening here from Ireland. And it was actually 12 degrees today. So we have having a very, very mild winter. I don't know what it's like where you are. So let me know where you're from. There's Sal from Ulla. I hope this does cheer you up, Salv. New York, Washington, lovely to see the same names, lovely. A very warm London. Okay, Julia, it's the same here. Virginia, hi, Mark, Frank, and New Brunswick, London, again, Australia, 16 degrees. My God, 16 degrees Celsius in London. That's very, very warm. We would consider that good in summer here sometimes. And Frank from Eureka, High River, Canada, Essex, wonderful. Richmond, Denver, Netherlands, and then there's Egypt, Sydney, Australia. Thank you for getting up so early. That's wonderful. And New South Wales, beautiful. And Switzerland, Belgium, Sydney, again, lots of Australians, and Slough. So listen, let me introduce you to my guest this evening, and we're going to Iowa in the US, which I believe is right in the middle. So I'd like to introduce you to Jules Bacon. Jules, it's so lovely to have you. You're such a welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about, I've never been to, I've been to the US. I've been to the East Coast, been to the West Coast, and I've never been in the middle. And I've been to New Orleans because that's where we met. So right. What's Iowa like?
Well, right now it is also about 16 degrees, but of course that is Fahrenheit. So it is very cold right now. We've got a couple inches of snow on the ground and more predicted to be on the way. I live in a small town that's sort of in the middle of a state that's in the middle. So I'm very much kind of in the middle of everywhere or in the middle of nowhere, depending how you feel. Yeah, it's nice here. It's very rural. Lots of cornfields and kind of rolling hills, patches of trees along the rivers, but not a lot of forest, I wouldn't really say. So sort of distinct in that way.
And I just wonder, sometimes how the environment in which you live affects your mood or your temperament, or even maybe, I don't know, your personality. What's it like to be in the middle of either, as you say, somewhere or nowhere?
Yeah. I've only lived here for about 2 years. I grew up on the East Coast in Massachusetts. And then I lived for a long time, like 12, 13 years in Oregon. And then I moved here for work a couple of years ago. And this is the first time I've really lived somewhere where there's not a big body of water.
Okay.
Nearby. And I feel like that feels really strange to me, to not have rivers kind of moving. There's something that feels different about being in a place that doesn't have sort of access to water. And I haven't really put my finger on it yet, but I have definitely taken note of it. I feel like the sky is like the dominant feature here. Like the air and the sky are the dominant features.
That is fascinating because for me, I'm surrounded by trees or little hills because it's Ireland. And when I lived in Lesotho, which is surrounded by South Africa, I remember driving from Lesotho, which was a 4-hour journey to Johannesburg in the Orange Free State, no trees except on the horizon where there was a river or a few houses. And I found that wide open space really challenging. I like to have the containment of a horizon close to me. What's it like for you?
I don't dislike it, honestly. I think it is a little unsettling not having the water, but it is really interesting to feel sort of the intense power of the sky. Like about a little over a year ago, we had what's called a derecho, which is like an inland hurricane. Okay. So this is like tornado alley. We definitely get tornadoes here, but this was a different thing. This is like an inland hurricane. And it was just this amazingly powerful windstorm, very destructive and terrifying, to a certain degree, but also stunning. You know what I mean? Like once you're over the fear and like the concern and like cleaning up the trees and whatever. Yeah, amazing to really think about the intensity and the power of the air. Like it really feels like you could just be swept off.
Wow.
And I don't know. It really, in other places where I've lived, like the sky is there and it's lovely and whatever, but you don't feel this real like awe of it in that kind of way. And here the sky almost has the kind of awe-inspiring feeling that the ocean has in other places. You know, it's like it is so large, it is so powerful, and you are just kind of like in awe of it. And it's there all the time.
Wow, I was just going to say it because I've never had that from the sky, but I certainly have it from the sea when I'm walking by. Wow. So, of course, we met. So, I think when we met, you had come. I think you'd driven 5 days to come to the North Coast Gathering, and I thought that is a pilgrimage. That is dedication. So, you must. That's when you were living in Oregon, yes?
I had traveled into Iowa and then from Iowa to Louisiana. So it's not so far from Iowa to Louisiana, thankfully. But yeah, it's great. I was really pleased to find something that was going on that, you know, I've been a solitary practitioner of like, you know, I've been pagan for a long time and I've been a druid much shorter period of time. But I've been a solitary practitioner my whole life, pretty much. And so it was exciting to find something that was going to be like a group event, an opportunity to kind of create some community. So
was this your first gathering?
It was, yeah, absolutely.
2019. So you said you were a pagan for a long time before you became a druid. So when did you join the order, or what brought you? How did you find the order, or how did you find druid?
Yeah, so I started thinking of myself as a pagan when I was like 13, and for a long time I practiced what I would have called like witchcraft. It was pretty much Wicca, I would say. That's, you know, kind of solitary Wicca. But I was very interested in Celtic cultures and thinking about Ireland, but also thinking about Gaul, and like that was sort of where my interests were, and that got me to Druidry pretty quickly. Like I found some books fairly early on, but when I read them, I also felt like, ooh, this feels very British and very male. And I was like, I don't know. So I backed off of it. So even though I knew about it, like probably when I was like 15 or something like that, it didn't feel like it was the right fit for me. So I kind of didn't really go any further. The only thing I did go any further with was when I found the Druid Animal Oracle. I was like, yeah, that Oracle is fire. I love it. I've had it since sometime in the 90s. Like the same deck, and I was like, oh, this is so great. So it always felt kind of weird to me that I felt so powerfully about that, but then kind of felt like a disconnect from the order. But then actually I was listening to Druidcast, because I would still listen to the show because I thought it was great and informative and, you know, fun. I love it. And then I heard about you, and I was like, well, what is this? The new chosen chief, a woman, an Irish woman at that. I was like, oh, okay. Well, perhaps I need to reconsider. You know, maybe it's not as male dominated and British as I had been led to believe. And so that brought me to the order.
Okay, so you're very recent then.
Very recent.
It's interesting. It always struck me when I joined the order. That was 2003. First went to gatherings in 2011. How even it was. This is certainly in my experience at gatherings in Glastonbury, for example. So I never ever had a sense that it was very male dominated, which is lovely. So I'm glad that you were able to revise your
yeah. And you know, now that I'm like actually, you know, in it and like talking to people who are in it, I agree. It is very mixed, like very diverse. But I think living in a place where there weren't other druids around, at least none that I knew of, and getting it only through books, you know, there's just these old photos of like a bunch of white guys in sheets, and you're like, I don't know about that.
That I get, absolutely. So you discovered or decided or whatever it is, or recognized or acknowledged that you were a pagan at 13. So what kind of background did you come from in terms of a spiritual background?
Yeah, so my parents are Catholic. I was brought up mostly Catholic. I mean, we went to church sometimes. My mom and her sister played music in the church, so we would go for that, and I would sing sometimes with them. But pretty early on, I was struck with the terrible disappointment that I couldn't become a priest because I was a girl. So like when I was like 3 or 4 at church was the coolest because the building that we went to was extremely beautiful. I mean, it was just one of the most gorgeous buildings I'd ever been in, and there were just paintings everywhere, and it was so colorful, and I was like, I love this. And I was like, yes, I'm really into the building, really into the ritual, and I was like, yes, I will be a priest someday. This is when I'm like 3 or 4. And they're like, oh, sorry, girls can't be priests. And I was like, what? That sucks. But I held in for a couple more years, and then I was being taught like, the Catholic Church is the one true church, that kind of thing. And I asked my catechism teacher, oh, wait a minute, does this mean that the Indians, meaning the Native Americans, for me, I was like, does this mean that the Indians are going to hell? And she said, well, if they're not Catholics, yeah, they're going to hell. And I was like, I'm out of this. Like, I cannot. And I came home and I was very upset. And I told my parents, I was like, I hate it there. I'm not going back. And they were cool with it. They were like, yeah, all right. Wow. So I made my first communion, and then I had that experience. And then, yeah, I sort of withdrew. And my parents respected that. Like, I think for them, they saw that I had a reason for what I was thinking and for what I was feeling. And they were like, okay.
Wow. So, and they supported you then in your spiritual path?
They did. I mean, I think they were very hands-off with me in a lot of ways. Like, my mom always said, like, we just never saw any reason to tell you not to do things, because the things you were doing, it seemed like you had thought them through. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like you knew what you were doing even when you were very young, and we kind of just let you go. Like, if you wanted to do something, we let you do it. And I really appreciate that about them, because I think other parents could have made life very hard for me.
I think it's very important, and as a parent myself, to trust your children and trust what they know, even if it's thinking outside the box or stepping out of the acceptable norms. Yeah. So my hat off to them to have supported you and said, okay, this is what you want, and trust you. I could never have done that. So I became an agnostic at 9 and then lived in fear of going to hell. There's a little bit of a dissonance there, and then discovered Druid much later. But but it's a really interesting. It's lovely to hear that was your parents' attitude towards you.
Yeah, I mean, I think they had been rule breakers themselves in a lot of ways, and so I don't think they were. I don't think they were surprised when I turned out the way I did. Yes. Like, my father has these stories of, like, he's a bit older. He was born in the 30s. And he has these stories of going to school, and he went to a Catholic school, and just standing up for younger kids who are getting harassed by the priests or things like that. And at one point he told a priest to take his collar off and step outside. Like, he was threatening to get into a fight with him. So I know my father was a hellraiser. And I think when he saw me kind of resisting certain things, he was like, okay. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Wow. It takes a lot of courage to call a person in authority out. That's wonderful. Brilliant. So, now that you moved to Iowa, have you found are you still solitary, or do you have a grove near you, a seed group?
As far as I know, I haven't met any other Druids in Iowa. I'm sure they're out there. So if you're out there right now, do hit me up. Yeah, I'd love to know about it. I have met some pagans here of various kinds. So that's been nice for us. Like, we've had conversations and things like that, but we're not really practicing together. I am fortunate in that I live with my cousin, who's also pagan. So there's the two of us. So we have our own kind of hearth situation going on. Okay. So what brought you to this town in the middle of Iowa, in the middle of the US? Yeah. So I came here for work. In 2018, I completed my PhD at the University of Oregon. And then I was offered a job here in Grinnell. So I came out here. I teach sociology.
Okay. And what particular area of interest have you in what calls you within sociology? What is it you like to teach, or what do you like to get your teeth into?
Ooh, so I'm an environmental sociologist. So most of the stuff I do is around sort of people's relationships to the natural world. And that sometimes includes environmental activism, but sometimes other things, just like everyday environmental thinking and practices. Most recently, I taught a class on armed conflict in the environment, which was a really interesting and disturbing, but good class to teach. The students were great.
What conclusions did you come to? Armed conflict?
We read a book together called Tropic of Chaos, which is talking about sort of the ways that climate change is exacerbating already unstable kind of political situations. So I don't know that we came to any conclusions, but we were just, sort of increasingly concerned about things we maybe were already concerned about when we came into the class.
Okay. I have a question here from Gunter. Gunter's in Switzerland. Hi, Gunter. I think rule breakers are very important for society because it's important to find out which rules are the really noble ones. What do you think, Jules?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have to question the kind of norms and rules that we're given. A lot of things are handed to us. And I think it's dangerous to just accept them wholesale and say like, okay, yeah, this is how it's always been. So I guess this is how it should be. Like, we need to think for ourselves and interrogate, like, is this a rule that is just, and should I follow it, or is it just harming me? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so where you are, you're free to be who you are, be a pagan in this university and teach what it is you teach.
Yeah, absolutely. The school is great. I mean, they really allow a lot of openness, and yeah, there are other pagan professors here, so it's nice. Yeah.
Great. So apart from, do you have a daily practice?
I do. Yeah.
So what do you do?
I mean, most mornings when I wake up, like I don't know how many altars I have in this house right now, like at least 3 or 4 that are operational right now. And like, there's one small one that's kind of at a window. And from that window, I can see the sunrise and I can also see the sunset because the window faces sort of directly south and it allows me enough access to look in both directions. So yeah, I just light a candle there, say some basic sort of centering prayers, do a little, meditation, light body exercise, that sort of thing, whatever I'm feeling the mood for. And just start the day off in that kind of way.
Wonderful, wonderful. So does the Imas or the Awen come to you? How does creativity come to you?
Yeah. Whew. I mean, I think there are some kind of metaphysical sides to it. And then I think there are also some sort of really practical ways that inspiration strikes sometimes. Like metaphysically, like I was thinking about this earlier today, like when I was younger, there was a period of my life where I don't know, homeless is perhaps too big of a word, but like I was living in a van and we were just traveling around and we didn't really have money or jobs or anything like that. And there would be times where sometimes we'd be really broke and we'd be looking for things, looking for supplies, for gas, for food, whatever. And I would go and just have these sort of spontaneous songs, and they were not anything great, but like it would just be like little songs on a flute that I would play. And I still have the flute actually. But whenever I would do that, it was like a kind of prayer meditation, and like the resources we needed would come to us. Wow. And so to me, that was like really this kind of instantaneous thing. And then as soon as it happened, it was gone. Like I couldn't repeat it if I wanted to. Like whatever the song was, it was there and then it was gone. And I have chants like that happen sometimes that I use when I'm doing readings and things like that. Like before I will do oracle cards or things like that. And then on a more practical level, there's just times when, like, you know, you need inspiration to figure something out because you're in a jam, like you're growing a plant, it's just not working. Like, why is this plant not thriving? So you just get like a little inspiration of like, well, I'll try this. So yeah, I mean, I think the inspiration's always flowing in different ways.
That's beautiful. So you busked your way around the country through inspiration.
I mean, it wasn't even busking. It was like, it was magic. I mean, it was pure magic, honestly, because it would be private. Like I would go off somewhere away from everyone else, play this song, kind of ask the spirits, like, if there's a person out here who will help us find what we need or give us what we need, please send them to us because we're like getting desperate right now. And then it would happen. Like within the day, it would happen.
Wow. I am so impressed. So impressed. I mean, it takes such trust. And also, absolutely, it's magic. And as you are a Gaeilgeoir, just to let everyone know that the second time I met Jules was in Sligo. Just bumped into her on the street and she was in Donegal for I don't know how many years in a row you've gone there to learn Irish.
It had only been 2, yeah.
Only 2. Okay.
2.
But I don't know if you may know this already, but the Irish word for magic and druidry is the same. It's Driocht.
Driocht, yeah.
So just the idea of going away privately and chanting whatever comes to you and then seeing what happens and then it coming. Absolute magic. Beautiful.
You know, that meeting in Sligo, like I was trying to explain this to, so one of my friends here who is pagan, she's pagan, but she also doesn't really believe in magic and also doesn't really believe in the gods. And I'm like, this is interesting because I don't understand how that works. But everything for her is like, oh, it's just a coincidence. And I was trying to tell her, like, yeah, but at some point there's so many magical coincidences in your life. How do you continue to say, like, that's just a coincidence? Mm-hmm. And I was telling her this story of, like, running into you. I'm like, how do you say that that's just a coincidence? Like, you're in another country. Like I had just arrived in Sligo. Mm-hmm. I went to the hostel where I was staying. I put my stuff down. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to take a little walk and see what's around. And I was just wandering. I had no idea where I was going. I had no plan. And like the very first cross street I came to, you were on the other side of the street. I'm like, what is the odds of that? Like, you can't just say that's coincidental. And like, I don't know. To me, that's a magical thing. But I think there's also the option to choose to see magic in things.
That's true.
Or to not, you know. So
I mean, normally I wouldn't have been in Sligo at that time. I was just meeting Sean there for another reason. Normally I'd have gone straight to Donegal. So yeah.
Yeah, it was. And if I remember correctly, you were headed to a place that I maybe had just come from.
Creevy Keel, was it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I had just come from there. And then my friends dropped me off in Sligo. And so, yeah.
And I hadn't been there before. That was my first time there.
That was my first time there as well. Yeah.
Really? Wonderful, wonderful. So, Bacon is what kind of a name is it? I know there are Irish Bacons. So tell me about your name.
There are Irish Bacons and there are English Bacons and there are French Bacons. That's what I am. But yeah, they're all Norman. So it's a Norman name. So that's why we're everywhere. So
your Bacon side, where did they come from? Did your Bacons come from Normandy or did they come from Ireland or did they come from England?
Yeah, no, they came from Normandy into Canada.
Okay.
Like quite a while ago, 1600s, something like that. So.
Okay. And my name Burke is a Norman name also. And nice. I live in a Norman town, Kilkenny, here in Ireland. So what drew you to Ireland? You know, what called you to want to learn the Irish language and where did that come from?
Yeah. So while I was at the University of Oregon, one of the things I was working on had to do with access to sacred places as sort of a kind of environmental justice. Okay. So thinking about how people are denied access to their sacred lands, particularly Indigenous people in the United States. Mm-hmm. And like in the course of doing that work, I came into contact with a lot of people who were doing language revitalization stuff. it was all very interesting to me, and like spent a lot of time talking to people about like kind of what that meant to them. And then one night I had a dream where my grandmother asked me to give myself to Irish for a year. So my mother's mother came to me in a dream, and she passed away when I was like 8 years old. And she said, yeah, give Irish a year, or give yourself to Irish for a year. And I was like, okay, so I'll do that. But then it ended up being like more than a year. That was like probably 2015, 2016, something like that. So
was your grandmother Irish born?
No, she wasn't. Her maternal line came during the famine. So
okay, so she didn't have any Irish.
No.
Wow.
No.
And so what made you choose Donegal?
Yeah. How did that happen? I think I met a guy at a protest in Oregon who was also working with Indigenous people, but who had Irish ancestry, who was also learning Irish. And he had been there. He had been to Donegal. And he said, oh, yeah, it's a good place to go. You should go there and, take some classes. Like, your Irish will get a lot better. And that was like a dream. I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do that someday. And then, God, this is such a complicated story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Here we go. In like 2015, 2016, I don't know what happened to me, but all of a sudden my back was just like a ruin. Like, I couldn't walk more than like a quarter of a mile. I went to all these doctors, and like no one seemed to understand what was going on with me. And like, so I don't know. It was pretty bad for like about a year. But eventually, going to physical therapy and all this, I started to feel better. And then right before I graduated, I fell down a small flight of stairs, but I like really smacked my back like on the ground. But when I got up, I wasn't in pain. And I was like, you know what? Like, anything could happen at any moment. Like, I could be in terrible pain again at any moment, or I could be dead at any moment. So like, why wait? If I want to go to Ireland, I should just go. So I took what little bit of money I had and decided to go.
Wow.
So that's when I went the first time. Yeah.
And how long did you how long was the course for? How long did you?
The first time I just went for a couple of weeks, and then the second time I was there for about a month.
Okay. And did your Irish improve? Or had you been attending classes in the US?
I had gone to one weekend class in San Francisco at that point. And my Irish improved there too. I mean, just having people around who like actually speak the language helps you so much. I mean, trying to figure things out just from like Duolingo or something like that that's incredibly hard. But yeah, just being around speakers is so helpful.
And now that you know how it sounds, how do you find Duolingo after that?
I find it as I always found it, like, weird. Why am I being taught how to say something about like peaches in the fridge? Like, I don't know, why am I getting this sentence? Like, this is not useful to me. Yeah. I'm really hoping that someday they'll have a course where they're doing some sort of nature walk or like outdoor thing that's entirely in Irish, because I think it would be really useful to like kind of combine those two things. I know that Idjascale has like hill walking classes, but those tend to be all in English. And I think what happens is like couples will come, and one is a nerd for language and the other is like, God, I just need something to do while this language nerdery is happening. But I kind of want to have both of them happen at the same time. I feel like that would be so, instructive and just like meaningful.
Once there's a context for the language. Have you come across Manchán Magan?
No. Oh, wait. Yes. Recently. Yeah. I did. Okay. Yes.
Look him up, because he has done, I was at a show of his in October in the pouring rain. We were in shelters and he was in the rain, called Arán agus Im, bread and butter.
Yes. Where the people are making butter, right? Like in the audience, you're making butter.
He passed the churn around to everybody, and we were all doing it.
That's awesome.
He makes some bread and put it in an oven, and then we all ate bread and butter, and it was just wonderful, because every word he used, and he was talking about the magic in the Irish, and picking up a bit of flour and dropping it and said, this is a coneen. This is just this little spray of flour. And then a skip is the bit you throw on the baking tin so it doesn't stick. And that's where the fairies are. And you put a cross in the bread to let the fairies out. And it just animated the Irish language. And I was so sorry I didn't bring a notebook and pen because I was just enthralled by him. But he does lots of documentaries around trees, around in Ireland. So he's well worth, if you Google him, I'm sure you'll find lots of stuff that he's doing. That'll give you until you find that program on nature walks. Yeah, so Mark Rhodes Taylor says, I think he's appeared on the Mythical Ireland YouTube channel. I'm sure he has. He's to be he does he's written books, Tamagotchi, The Sea, Old Words That Are Lost. So he's interested in Moncon McGann. Here, I'll just put it in. He's an absolute treat.
I feel like I found an old documentary with him where he was just walking around talking in Irish, trying to get people to respond to him.
Yeah. And that's one of them. And what he's done is he did this Tamagotchi Gaeilge, which I did, Tamagotchi Irish. I never got to see it. Was he had taken old words, and there was a little ritual that COVID's probably stopped it as well, where then you went in, and then he gave you a word that you became the steward of, some old word, and there's not that you kept it in a little notebook, is that you used it and you animated and revived that word and used it. And he's done old words for sea, and he's done one for children. It's just fascinating. It's like it's non-threatening. That's the thing, because I think a lot of Irish people here. Now, I love Irish. I've loved it from the time I started in primary school. That hasn't been everybody's experience. Others kind of feel, oh, it was a terrible. I think a lot of it was around grammar and getting it right rather than just speaking. And his is a very non-threatening way of engaging with Irish, because he has a story for every word.
Yeah.
So it just animates the whole thing. So yeah, I do Irish on Duolingo. I started 5 years ago, so I'm still doing it. But I took up Italian as well.
Oh, nice.
I find that good because Italian's it's a Latin language. I do recognize how difficult Irish is to learn. Not impossible, but I've been brought up with it. So obviously the phonetics and the whole lot, and the syntax is all so different. Where if you're learning a Latin language, it's easy enough, you know.
Yeah.
But still, there's lots of magic in it. So.
Yeah, definitely. My cousin was trying to learn Welsh for a while, and she was just like, "Oh my God, this is so hard." And I was like, "Yeah." I mean, it's very different, you know, from what you're used to.
Yeah, and I took up Welsh and Duolingo, but then I was doing Swahili as well because I've been to Africa a lot. And I thought, you know, I'm just going to focus on my Italian and my Irish. And again, you know, with the Welsh there are certain words that are similar, but the spelling is like, oh.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. And Gabriella says, I learned several languages watching cartoons and listening to music. It makes happy associations in the brain. Definitely recommend it. And I know from a lot of Europeans, so say Dutch and German, will say, how do you know, and Belgians say, how come your English is so good? Is this just from watching TV? So that there's that thing about absorbing it just by listening to it.
Totally.
Yeah. And then Sarah is studying Welsh and Japanese on Duolingo. Well done.
Nice.
Okay, now you're certainly taking two difficult languages because you're thinking spelling in Japanese, writing and all of that. My hat off to you. I am impressed. So when you think of, you said your mother or your grandmother came, or was it her parents that came after the famine?
Yeah, I guess it must have been hers. Yeah.
And then your Norman ancestry. How do you honor your ancestors, or how do you? Or I suppose there's a number of questions. There's ancestry, and then there's one thing I want to ask you is about how you identify. And I'm always interested in people's identity and how you navigate that as a Druid living in the US and all of that goes with that. So,
yeah, I think
one.
That's a complicated one. Yeah, because we can add into the mix that I also have some Indigenous ancestry from Canada, so like that also gets complicated. And I think for a long time, that was like my primary pressing question was like, how to navigate that identity. Like, because I've encountered so many different opinions, especially when I was younger, where people would be like, oh, well, you're only a little bit native, so you're not native. And then there are people who are like, well, if you have any native ancestors, like you're a native person, so you should honor them by saying that. And I think I've kind of come to a position where I'm like, well, because the politics around it are so fraught, and there are so many people who have kind of falsely presented themselves and profiteered off of falsely presenting themselves. I just sort of keep that as like a personal thing that I know about myself. And it definitely drives the work I do and like the way I think about things. But I think people are identifying based on a political identity in the United States. And so in the US, if you don't have, tribal citizenship, if your tribe doesn't recognize you and have you as a citizen, then probably it's not appropriate to identify that way. That's kind of the stance I've come to on that. Which is sort of similar to how a lot of people I've met in Ireland seem to feel, right? Like if you're an Irish citizen, then you're Irish. If you have Irish ancestry, that doesn't make you necessarily Irish. It makes you a person who's a descendant. So yeah, I think of myself in terms of like that I'm a descendant of Indigenous people and I'm a descendant of Irish people, descendant of French people. But yeah, I don't have any strong allegiance to being an American, particularly. Like I'm actually always kind of plotting like how could I leave. So that hasn't come to fruition yet, but I have faith that at some point it will.
Where would you go?
I mean, ideally Ireland, honestly. My girlfriend is Italian. She probably has enough Italian ancestry that she could get Italian citizenship. So that's another angle that we've considered. But yeah, I don't know. I just I love the land here, especially places where I've lived for a long time. Like I love Oregon. Oregon is incredible. And even though people have done a number on the natural landscape in Massachusetts, it is still a beautiful place. And even Iowa, although I'm just getting to know it, it's very powerful. And like I've had good experiences with the land here, but I think politically, we are a mess. So yeah, I don't have any strong allegiance to it. I couldn't say.
So you'd come to Ireland. So people often, as anyone ever said it to you, you're not, you said about some people in Ireland think if you're not a citizen, you're not Irish.
Yeah.
What about the question about, okay, you're not Irish, so why, or you're not a Celt, for example, or how can you be engaged in Druidry? What's your view on that, or how do you respond to that?
I think a lot of that is really troubling. Like, I don't know. On the one hand, I understand that people want to do a certain amount of like gatekeeping, but I think that a lot of that is kind of a trauma response, right? Like there's been so much exploitation and like violence inflicted, on Irish people, and then here in the US on Indigenous people. Like it makes sense that people are trying to create some kind of like line where they say like you're in, you're out. But I don't know. It seems quite dangerous as a way of thinking about things and acting. So
Stephanie said,
oh, yeah.
It's hard to know what to identify as an American. You can feel where your ancestors came from, but that doesn't mean we can identify as that, although we can always embrace different cultures of any kind. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Like, I think it's important to know, like, as much as you can about who your ancestors are, like where they came from. I think that's very meaningful. And it also helps you get a better sense of the world and kind of the different movements and political changes that have happened over time. I think this thing where people get really like, I don't know, possessive or like hardline about certain identities, that's where to me it starts to feel like a kind of dangerous move.
And I suppose somebody suggested we'd smuggle you out and help you both find a cozy nest here in Aero. Thank you, Sal.
I'm into it. Let's do it.
I think so. And I suppose one of the things I really appreciate about the order is that that anyone can be a member of the order. It doesn't matter what your nationality is, or it doesn't matter what your previous spiritual path has been. That there's that expression for diversity, regardless. So it's. I think that's one of the gifts that the order gives its membership, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the nice things for me is like there's also really no dogma. You know, there's like not really any expectation that we're all going to be doing things the exact same way. You know, and so not only is it open in terms of who can join, but it's sort of open in terms of how you can express, you know, and follow your path. So it's lovely.
Gabriella says here, isolating cultures tend to stagnate and die out. There are some that are held sacred and you say in the Amazon, they stay clean. But being open, letting people changing and sharing helps. I think so, because I think the notion that culture is something cast in stone. Culture evolves all of the time. Languages evolve. When I think of the Ireland I grew up in, well, pre-COVID anyway, everything has changed now with all of this, but grew up in a very strongly Roman Catholic Ireland, very much a monoculture, mostly Catholic, few other small percentage of other religions, mostly white, and ruled by the Catholic Church, and the government was ruled, and very conservative, very narrow. And when I think of, you know, what happened when we joined the EU, so many things opened up, and we have now live in a much, much freer country, and I'm very glad. The important thing is that you don't throw everything out, is that you to be able to keep what's good and valuable about your culture, and at the same time weave in other worldviews that allow people to develop and to be who they need to be. So diversity is great. So, and Lisa says, I'm an American, but first generation born here of European Jew, British, but lived in China several generations, but born and raised in California and Oregon. I'm very connected to the land, indigenous and natural world here. Great. That's lovely to be able to do that. And then Teresa says, this is a wonderful conversation. Personally, it is difficult to identify culturally when you're descendant from so many cultures, including areas of the US, like in the Appalachian area. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. Like, personally, I don't have a strong like feeling of like, oh, I am this one thing. And I think probably it does feel great for some people to have that. Like, it must be very uncomplicated. And I'm sure that's nice, but I think this is nice too. You know what I mean? Like, I see a lot of people get like all like sad about it. Like they're all down in their feelings about it. Like, oh, I'm, you know, it's hard. And it's like, yeah, it's hard, but it's also like other people make it hard. Other people make it harder than it needs to be, by insisting on some kind of, you know, purity or authenticity or whatever to be like, I don't know, real or good enough or whatever. Like,
I'm going to come back to that. Somebody says, Leah Green says, to play devil's advocate, what about gatekeeping a culture?
What about it?
Yeah, it's an interest. Yeah, it's I know I've lived in Kenya, I've lived in Lesotho, and for 20 years, every year I taught in Tanzania, and I have a house there and I have very, very close Tanzanian friends. And conversation came up. I have a shack, actually. You can see daylight through the wooden planks. It wouldn't get house status here. But we were having a conversation about buying a site at some point, building. And this was being encouraged by Tanzanian friends. And I remember Howard, my husband, saying, but we'd always be outsiders. And they said, Yeah, you would. You'd never be Tanzanian. So you'd accept that. And we need outsiders. And there's something about, and that was really reassuring for both of us, is that something about valuing the outsider perspective, because the outsider often asks, I mean, you're talking about a sensitive outsider, not somebody who's an out and out colonialist.
Right.
That outsider asks the naive questions that the insiders can't ask, and sometimes can put up a gentle mirror that it can often be really, really useful, rather than us, we're all the same, because then we don't allow for any diversity.
Totally.
And then Catherine Sola says, as an Eastern European living in Scotland, I have my point of view on those questions, but I did struggle with the Celtic ancestor connection subject and questions like that beginning. And indeed, I am a Druid and Eastern European person and very happy about both cultures carrying within me. Absolutely. And then Frank Martinez, when you're Mexican, well, the concept of mestizaje, did I pronounce that? Being a mestizo, okay. A person of mixed heritage is just easy. So it's okay. And then Ferdiad, well done, Ferdiad. Like, it can be worth considering more guardianship of a group rather than gatekeeping. And there's also the question of who's doing the gatekeeping. Is it somebody within that culture, or is it some well-meaning outsider who thinks they need to protect the insiders? And that's always an interesting one.
I think that's a critical question too. Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of guardianship goes back to kind of what I was saying. Like, you know, you can really see the logic of why some people would want to be protective of certain things, just because there are so many histories of exploitation. And so, yeah, in some cases, I do think like there's a logical reason for people to be guarding certain things, and it's worth being just respectful of that. Like, okay, sure, that's fine.
And I know our experience here in Ireland was, with our colonial masters, was, you know, banning the language and anything that, and I suppose this is the way of a colonial attitude is to denigrate the values of the colonized culture and to see very little of value other than something to be exploited, like resources or whatever.
Right.
So my grandparents didn't speak Irish, they didn't learn it. And so my parents' generation did with the Gaelic revival. And it was very, very important that we were able to reclaim all of that, because when you're colonized, everything is bad and less than. And so I see that as something that needs to be protected. And then sometimes, you know, we've had our Irish people living here, who actually were involved in the revival.
Absolutely.
And some Irish people don't regard them as those Irish people because they're Anglo-Irish, when in fact, well, if they were born here and they were citizens, does that make them Irish? There's all that kind of stuff. But then were they loyal to Britain? There's all this complicated stuff. But so often it's outsiders sometimes too. We have a lot of academics who were not Irish academics, who looked at the old Irish and the texts, translated them, etc. And it's a really interesting one. So it's about, I think, certainly not wiping away Indigenous values, stories, culture, but not stealing it either for yourself.
Right.
So it's, but sometimes things have been revived by outsiders, and if they hadn't, they might have been lost.
Yeah, I have a friend who talks about this a lot. She's an artist and she's Indigenous, and you know, there are certain things that were recorded, patterns of art, you know, basket patterns and things like that were recorded by people who were outsiders, and otherwise, you know, had they not been recorded, they wouldn't be seen. And so that's part of the revival now, is that you can look at those old patterns and you can make something new, you know, something that continues.
So somebody says, Alan Hoskins, who was a guest some months back, this is a great conversation. As you know, Eimear, the word mongrel is incorporated in my email address, which says a lot. I was born and grew up in England. My mother was Welsh. Her mother was born in Patagonia, had a French maiden name. My London-born and bred father had Scottish grandparents. I'm more at home here in Ireland than I've ever been anywhere in my 64 years. I'm an Irish citizen now. That's my identity. but a European citizen of the world. That's really interesting, Alan. And Howard, my husband's father, was Irish with a Scottish name. His mother was Scottish. He was born in Wales but brought up in England and never had a hometown. And then he settled in Ireland and thought, this is where I belong. But described himself, even though he was an Irish citizen, described himself as a European or a citizen of the world or a European citizen of the world. So love this conversation. This is Leah. In primary schools, we have to teach British values, i.e. cultural diversity and tolerance. It's so important to have these conversations, especially in a divided world, being shown and discussed so respectfully. Absolutely. Then Salve says, banning our rights to ancestral land and even weaving certain types of tartan or colour, also the restrictive ownership of certain dogs and livestock. That was all in the past, and fortunately, it's not here now. So, Pat Booker says, Pat, I picked up a terrible day to arrive late. Hi, Jules. So anyway, hi, Pat. How are you? So. Okay, and then Gabrielle, in my view, a lot of things are sensitive, important to people because of the awful history and unhealed wounds. And it's really interesting. Something about joining the order has really helped heal that wound for me between England and Ireland. Because when I went there, when I first went to the gatherings, to be welcomed as an Irish person, not sure if I would, or what people's attitude would be, that's been really, really healing for me. And of course, Frank just says, again, as a mestizo, you're both a descendant of the oppressors and the oppressed. And I think that's a really important one, is to when you think of mongrels and all of us, where we come from. So my mother is Moron, the great ones. That's what that means. Not a stupid person. Moran. And then Burke is a Norman name. So there's both strands in my, in my history and in my DNA. Yeah. And it's about, there's that in all of us. And we are all very, very capable of being oppressor and being oppressed.
For sure.
So it's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is really troubling to me, though, to see, like, these sort of weird purity obsessions that do seem to be percolating, on social media and things like that.
Yeah.
With younger people, even, I'm like, oh, Lord, please don't go down this road.
We've been there before, and look where it got.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like, nowhere good. So, yeah.
I like to use the analogy of a salad, and OBOD is like a salad. We have all sorts of leaves, different colors. You can have nuts, seeds.
Plenty of nuts going on. I'm one of them.
Absolutely. But you can have meat, fish, cheese, or it can be vegan. It doesn't matter. It can be, and you can have different kinds of dressings, but it's not a puree. So you have all those textures. And when you look at a salad and an interesting salad, you see all of these things. And what a lovely tapestry it creates.
Yeah.
Difference is healthy and diversity is healthy. And cultures have always evolved. They've always moved and grown.
Yep, absolutely.
And then there's also this thing about, people have always moved as well. People migrated out of Africa and people settled, and then they became the indigenous people.
Yep.
Then some moved on. So it's a really, really hard one,
I think we have a weird kind of short view of history in the United States. Like, we think of things that happened in the last 300 years or so, maybe 400 years. And then we're kind of murky after that. It's almost like, we think the world began with the US or whatever. And it's a little bit absurd, we have these really hardened identities that people are clinging to that really didn't even exist until a couple hundred years ago.
That's right.
In these contexts, so it's like, I wouldn't get overly invested in it. Yeah. It's just it's a blip. And to be thinking more about the future and about what the future could be seems like a better idea than obsessing over, the past.
I couldn't agree with you more. Pat says purity is a type of unforgiving fundamentalism, and it has clean, straight logic. Very appealing. We don't mind how it hurts people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Salve says, joining the rebellious alternative subcultures and pagan community I found early on in Belfast paved over the division and healed much. So would say Northern Ireland, you were divided along either Catholic, Protestant, nationalist, loyalist divide. And that causes so much pain. And then when you look at European countries, they weren't countries a few hundred years ago. They were states. We have to thank Oliver Cromwell. This will drive Irish people crazy. He brought republicanism and nationalism to Ireland, that because it was that nation state of Ireland. But the rest, up to then, we were, chieftains.
Yeah.
There were tribes of people all over the country. And that was the same in so many European countries. So the nations are, what would you say, artificially created by governments and politicians and victors and all of that, the idea of moving forward as citizens of the world, not to lose our languages, not to lose, people think that nationalism can become a dirty word, but it doesn't have to be a negative thing, but it's to be able to appreciate, I'm Irish, that's how I identify. And I really like that. And I love the Irish language and I like the Irish culture. I'm not in the middle of the Irish culture. If there was a bell curve, I'm on the outside, because a lot of things in Irish culture I still don't understand, even though I was born here. But Hannah is purebreds tend to suffer genetic problems. Yes, they do, Hannah. The strength of mongralism, I think, is really, really important. So it's like to have that, but also to have, like I say, that salad rather than pureeing everything.
Yeah.
So they're all assimilated completely into one, but to be able to notice the differences.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just to reiterate, like, to me, that is one of the strengths in OBOD. Like, I've met Christian druids, pagan druids, and pagan druids of every kind of stripe, like, into different sorts of gods and paths and traditions. Atheist druids.
That's right.
And it's lovely, I mean, a friend of mine asked, like, oh, well, do you fight? Like, are there fights between the Christian and the pagan druids? And, like, I'm sure there have been, but I've never witnessed it. Like, it's never come up, because there is sort of this shared understanding that, like, we do have these core values around nature and around creativity as being sacred, and, like, wherever it goes from there is sort of like, okay, that's where it goes from there, but it's not, no one is being held to, like, an exacting standard about what they should believe or do.
No, and I think it's because of the shared values we have, and deeply held values, not the trimmings. So whether you work with deity, or you're an animist or an atheist or a polytheist, or you're into geotheism, it doesn't matter, because they're not the fundamentals. It's our love of nature, being of service, looking at the world through an ethical lens, that notion of responsibility, following the seasons. And of course, when you look at the diversity within the order, your landscape, you were talking about, I can't remember the word you said, but that hurricane thingy.
The derecho.
Yeah, so you have, the sky is your dominant element where you are. We're here, it's the earth and the trees. But we're both druids, and we can share a huge amount in common. And it's about focusing on what unites us rather than what divides us. And you see, when we focus on what connects us, the differences are always really interesting.
Right. Rather than being threatening.
Yeah, I think they're fascinating. So that is so important. And that's what I love about the order, that we are allowed, and I suppose that's what attracts so many members, is that openness to diversity, so that no matter what kind of an odd bod you are, you could find a little spot within the order, whatever quirky spiritual beliefs you have, as long as you as long as it calls to you, that love of nature and the landscape and being in tune with it, then, and you can bring whatever else with it, alongside it. And I suppose one of the strengths that it can hold that, where so many spiritual paths can't, because they're stuck in the rightness of whatever they're believing.
Yeah.
So, how do you honor your ancestors then?
Ooh, well, I mean, I suppose the language learning is sort of part of it. Definitely, I feel like I do a lot of weird, small ancestral things, sort of all the time. Like I've got this bag that I wear that has like rings from various women in my family who have passed away. And then there's a stone in here that's from a beach in Ireland. And it's sort of a way to take them to Ireland because they never got to go. So, and then I have photos of them on my altars. They're just around. They're all over the place. They're kind of always with me.
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. During Samhain, we had this huge ancestor altar, and it had my ancestors on it, and then also my cousins, and my girlfriends, and it was really getting quite out of control. It was very large and taking up an entire room in the front of the house, and we were fine with it. Like, it seems normal to us, but then we had this woman who was coming over because we were fostering kittens. And so she was going to be adopting the kittens. And so she wanted to come and visit them while they were still with us. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to look crazy.
And
yeah, she didn't say anything about it. But I mean, there were just like, crazy photos and like little bowls of fruit and like candy and like, just obviously an altar. Like there's nothing else it could have been. And I was like, oh, well, welcome to our home.
Beautiful, beautiful. Wait, I'm glad you said, when you said kittens, I thought first you said kids.
Oh no, kittens, little kittens. Maybe kids someday, but not at this point.
Oh, lovely. So, how do you see your own responsibility then as an ancestor? As an ancestor of the future.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's weird to think about, because like I don't have children, but at the same time, I do teach young people, like,
yeah,
every year, at least 100 or 200 people have been my students. And so, it is, yeah, I don't know. I guess to just be honest with them and like, let them know that, some of the things I'm going to, like, I teach a lot of things that I think are pretty depressing, honestly. Like I talk a lot about, environmental degradation and the violence that kind of goes along with that. And like, so sort of being honest with them about how knowing these things it feels like it takes some of the joy out of life, but also you need to know in order to do anything, so yeah, kind of riding that fine balance between like, I'm going to ruin your day, but perhaps also empower you to make something better in the future.
How do you navigate that yourself?
I don't know. I've just ruined a lot of my days. I'm just like, I mean, I've always had a compulsion to know, like when I was young, I was really fascinated by like political violence and like the violence that the state would enact against people who were dissidents or trying to resist. And like, as I got older, it started to morph more into environmental things, but like, obviously I'm still interested in both. And yeah, I don't know. There must be a reason that I feel like I need to know, even if it is very upsetting at the same time.
But it means you're awake, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're an activist. So what kind of activism do you engage in?
I mean, recently, not much of anything, because like everyone else, I've been holed up inside a building trying not to get COVID. But yeah, I don't know. I used to be very much into environmental activism and like either being on the ground myself or like going to places where people were on the front lines and like offering material assistance, food, or bringing things to people or whatever. But over time, I've sort of become a little less physically involved and a little more like, I don't know, culturally involved, but also just sort of providing material support from behind the
Do you think protests work?
Honestly, I've become less and less enchanted with the idea that it's effective. So maybe that's kind of why I've stepped back from it, is because I can honestly say the only protest I've ever been in that felt like it was effective was a strike. Like labor strikes, I do think are effective or can be.
Mm-hmm.
But other kinds of protests, maybe less so. Like, I feel like when I lived in Oregon, for example, we would often do these demonstrations or rallies or whatever, where it just felt like we were just marching around empty buildings yelling. And like, it felt good for everyone involved. Like, ooh, I'm in the street, I'm doing something, I'm yelling, I'm mad, I have a sign. But like, I never saw it accomplish anything materially in terms of the kinds of change we were trying to make. I think there's probably more to be accomplished by things that are less overtly protesty. Like mutual aid and things like that, I think might actually be more effective.
Say that again?
Mutual aid, or like, setting up societies where we're going to know each other, know our neighbors, and like help each other. Like be on the ground for each other to create real change in each other's lives, rather than just a few of us going out and yelling and risking arrest or whatever.
It's really interesting. Gabriella says they do work, not all the time, but they do. They add pressure.
Yeah. I think if they're part of a coordinated effort, there is an effect. So if there are people coming at it, not just the protesters, but also people working at it, within systems, within government, but then also the protesters on the outside, I do think that, yeah, you can sometimes get somewhere with that.
Are you getting a few people not agreeing with you here? How we ended segregation, cool. And women got the right to vote. That's true.
Absolutely. Oh no, I would never say that there are no examples of successful protest. Obviously there are, but I'm thinking about ones I've seen in recent years, ones that I have friends who like really risk their health and their safety and their lives for. Like the Dakota Access Pipeline, for example, like I know people who were there and they like really risked their lives being there. And in the end, there is oil flowing through that pipeline. And then just recently, Line 3, similar scenario, not for a lack of concerted effort of people on the ground to resist. There is a lot of resistance, but, people get steamrolled over.
It's an interesting one. Pat says, protest work where I live, at least the ones that genuinely are mass mobilizations of parts of the community and which carry the threat of violent disorder.
All right.
But there's that thing about, there's no point, well, for example, if you say, I'm not arguing with you, but just going with your, if there's no point protesting because they don't work, and you give those examples where it hasn't worked, and then we don't do anything. And then silence, inactivity.
Doing nothing is a terrible idea. Doing nothing is the worst idea.
So it's what do you do instead? And that's a hard one. That's
well, I think it's probably because of my sociology that I'm thinking this way, but like I feel like at some point societies have become pretty fragmented, at least in the US. I'll just speak about the US. Like I've lived here for 2 years now, 3 years. I really don't know anyone in this town.
Okay.
Like, I don't know the people who live next door, really. I don't know the people who live across the street. Like, I don't know anyone. And I think that is normal for a lot of people in the United States. Like, we really don't know our neighbors very much. And a lot of us are not very connected to where we live in any kind of way because financial constraints. There's the expectation that at any time your job might change or go away or whatever, and you'll have to leave. And so I think in that kind of context, when you have protests, they're often about large-scale issues far away. And people lose sight of what's happening on the ground around them. And they're not as able to react to like things that are happening that you might actually have a better chance of changing. So I think building community where you are is probably the more effective strategy than becoming invested in these kind of large-scale protests that are happening in a distant place.
I think you make an interesting point. Did you watch David Bramwell's talk at the Winter Gathering?
I didn't get to see it, no.
He was wonderful. So it was titled, it's based on his book, The Number 9 Bus to Utopia. And he decided for a year to go and visit various communities around Europe after a breakup of a relationship. But he said when he came back to the place where he still lives, he had been living at that point, I think maybe 10 years, and hadn't known any of his neighbors other than to say hello. But seemingly there was a guy, and I don't know, is he Portuguese? And I can't remember if anyone watching can remember the name. It began with, I think, Zocalo or something. This guy put a chair outside his front door. So it's an urban community, and said anyone up for a cup of tea and a chat. And it became that they then had street events, not carnivals, but conversations with, having a drink, having a cup of tea. And he said now he knows everybody on his street, and they have a WhatsApp group that, if they run out, Zocalo, thank you, Gabriella, Zocalo. And that was because people say, wouldn't it be lovely to have live in a creative community like Damanhur or Esalen or Findhorn? And he did that, or he saw the idea, and then he went for it. And it's a vibrant community. So if they want to borrow a cup of tea or a cup of sugar or salt or whatever it is, or child minding, whatever, they just put it into the WhatsApp. And now everybody knows each other. And that's so simple because all you needed was a chair.
Yeah.
And no planning permission to be able to do that. So I'm going to put it up to you now, you and your cousin.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that's the kind of thing that probably could make some important changes. I mean, it seems much less flashy than a protest. Like, I know a lot of people who like to go to protests so they can take a photo and they can post it on their Instagram or whatever, and they're like, "Ooh, look at me." But I think in the long run, actually knowing the people around you and like getting a better sense of community with the people that you're sharing a space with would probably be much more effective.
I think so. I think that allows you, Cindy says a chair and some courage. I agree. And then Sarah, I lived in Canada and people were always sitting on the front porches interacting with passers-by. There were no garden fences and we were always invited across the neighbours. I love that. And then Philippa says, I did that last summer, sitting in the front, feeding an injured fox. It worked and people stopped to talk. And I do think in times of when there's controls or human rights abuses or infringements in freedom, when you're on your own, it's very, very hard to stand up for yourself. Absolutely. But when you have a neighborhood who's there to support you, I think that can be amazing. And Eimear, community building has happened where I live, Montreal, because of COVID, strangely, because just walking locally, because they couldn't go anywhere else, started talking to each other and being kinder. Now we have a local community Facebook group. The change is amazing. It's that kind of stuff. And I think that can be really, really important. And then for those who want to protest, but it's like, what's the smallest single thing you can do? The smallest thing you can do that might be safest is putting a chair outside your door and a sign, I'm open for a chat.
And I just feel like that kind of thing might help us to catch problems before they spiral out of control. Like I was talking to some of my students, like I have some students who are really interested in climate change, and like obviously that makes sense because climate change is a massive problem. But they are also completely unaware of like some pretty disastrous environmental things that were happening in the towns where they're from. So they had done an assignment where they had to look into some local things that were going on, and they were like, oh crap, like I didn't know that the water just a neighborhood over is being completely polluted or something like that. And I think that's where kind of community building could be very important, because if our attention is always on these very large national or international issues, we might be missing these small problems that we could actually intervene on before they're disastrous for people. So yeah, that's sort of just how my perspective has kind of shifted.
Well, there's lots of response here that people are doing that. And Fergie, it says, it's very
That's
difficult
awesome.
to be friendly in the face of a nice cup of tea and cake. I agree. Yes.
Yep.
Hannah says start small, but that's it. And if people in their street started, then it can grow, and then that can be everywhere. And of course, you see, your local place is somebody else's far away.
Absolutely.
So when you think of, okay, the next village where water's being polluted, but that's somebody else's far away, but that you're close enough to help those people, or whatever the stand that needs to be. Pat says it's often more helpful to start raising consciousness with smaller local issues where people can score a victory. So many people feel impotent in the face of global climate change, that they retreat into denial or despair. Absolutely, Pat. Absolutely. I think it's that smallest step. And then when you feel you've had some, and that's even for ourselves, getting out of bed if you're depressed, that could be an achievement. What's the smallest thing you can do? When you've achieved that, then you can build on that. Yeah. So, what's been your greatest achievement? Speaking of protest or whatever.
God, I don't know. Staying alive. Staying alive, probably. I mean, that has been in a way a huge achievement. Like, I came out as pagan when I was 13. I also came out as gay when I was 13. Things were different then. I mean, they're still pretty bad for some people now, but like, certainly when I was 13, in a small town, it was not cool. I've had 2 different people point guns at me and threaten to kill me in my life. I had one person take a pass at me with a car. But despite all that, I am still alive. I am still gay. And I am out here having a great time. So yeah, I don't know. I think being alive and being happy and having a good life, and just continuing to push on and try to keep having a good life and help other people do the same. It's probably my biggest accomplishment.
It's like Jules says Anne says, Jules, you're very brave. And I think to start at 13, of course, when you're being brave, it may not feel like being brave because you're probably being terrified, but you're still, okay, this is who I am, and I'm going to stand up. I'm going to say who I am. I'm pagan, I'm a gay woman, and this is who I am. At 13, wow, in a small town. But to have that courage and to have that certainty of yourself and to be able to ground yourself in it, it's wonderful. And to be able to not lose it in spite of guns being pointed in your face or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I ever felt like I was being brave, but I felt like I had no choice but to be honest.
I think that's a very strong place to be when you feel you've no choice other than to be honest or to be who you are. So often people are afraid to. But it's almost like, well, there's no going back because you're awake and you cannot be other.
I feel like I've been tremendously blessed, honestly. Like, just tremendously blessed. Like, there's always been a sense, like, honestly, in my heart, I believe like whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and that it will be for the best.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do feel like there are spirits or whatever, I don't know, just like guiding me and protecting me, and so I've just kind of gone on with that.
It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And then you mentioned your grandmother. I don't know if you said it in this interview or beforehand, I can't remember, but your dream telling you, to go and focus on the Irish language, and so that support from the other side as well, from the other world, I think.
Yeah, I've strongly felt that. I think honestly throughout my whole life, like even when I was very young. And I think whenever I start really getting stressed out about things, like right before I went to Ireland the second time, which is when we ran into each other, it appeared that I had no job. Like I had a 1-year contract. I had spent the whole year teaching, but also like desperately writing job applications. I had put in over 80 job applications, got nothing. And I was like, oh my God, I have no job. But I had already bought the ticket to Ireland. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to go and have a great time, and we'll sort the rest of this out when it happens. And they were just calling my plane to board, and I got a phone call that I had another 2-year contract.
Oh, lovely.
And I was like, this is the thing. Like, I really do think sometimes the spirits like to mess with me a little bit just to see if I'll freak out. Then they're like, what an idiot you are. Don't freak out. And I'm like, okay, you're right. I was stupid to freak out.
That's wonderful. Of course, don't forget your ability to chant. And
yeah, like if worse comes to worse, we will at least get enough money for like, whatever, some pasta.
Wonderful. What's the most reckless thing you've ever done?
Reckless. Oh God. Oh.
It's a really long list.
It is a bit of a long list, probably. God, I don't know. There's been a long list. Taunting the police is probably the most reckless and honestly stupid thing I've ever done. But yeah.
What did you do?
Oh God. I mean, looking back on it, I'm like, what a stupid move that was. There was just this cop in a grocery store, and she was following me through the grocery store the whole way, just following me. So when I left, I looked at her and I said, hey, it was a pleasure shopping with you. And then she tried to arrest me.
Really?
Yeah, she subsequently lost her job because she was a loose cannon and pulled her firearm on someone. So looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I was really lucky because that was a person who
could have put a fire on you.
A dangerous person, like, but yeah, I was young and stupid. I don't know what to say about that.
Well, it's a stupid thing to do, but I think well done. I could, when you've somebody treating you like that, you're just not in a bad way. I mean, it was very pleasant.
Yeah. I mean, it's terrible, because like looking back on it and thinking about like current events, it's like, you're in the right, but you also know the extent to which the police just like,
that's right,
commit violence against people and then nothing ever happens to them. So it's like, however vindicated I felt at the time, like, Jesus, what a dangerous and stupid thing to do. So.
Pat says reckless equals hugging strange Irish women. What was she trying to arrest you for? Being gay in charge of groceries?
Yeah, I don't know. I think she thought I must be a thief, because I was poor at the time, and I still look poor, so I guess that just attracts attention.
Somebody suggested maybe she wanted a date.
Maybe she did. Maybe she did.
Her strategy, we want to brush up on that one.
Yeah, just a hello would be much better than a gentle stalking.
Oh, so do you have any regrets?
I would say, honestly, I really pride myself on not having any regrets. Like, I can't think of anything, even things I've done that didn't turn out well. Like, ultimately, it's all part of the experience, and like, nothing's ever gone that badly that I'm like, oh my God, I regret that. Like, would I do it again the same way? No, but I did the best I could at the time with what I knew,
And I assume you learned from it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. So what are you most grateful for?
Honestly, like, the gods, guides, and ancestors. I gotta be honest, like, whatever spiritual help I've received in this life feels like above and beyond anything that any individual probably deserves.
Wow.
So I would say that. My dog is looking at me right now like she thinks she's the thing that I am the most grateful for.
Well, one of them anyway.
Correct. Correct. She's like, hey, what about me?
What kind of a dog is she?
She's a pit bull.
Oh, she's Snow White.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Her name is Magic Moon. Oh,
yes, it's Ferdy says we need to see your dog. So just so that you've shown it right. Magic Moon.
Yeah.
Do you shorten it?
Yeah, she goes by Magic sometimes, and she also goes by Moon sometimes. And then she has a million nicknames, as it is.
She's Snow White, absolutely. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Someone says, sweet Magic Moon, adorable. So we've got dog lovers here.
Oh, yeah.
So in terms of joy, what brings you joy specifically?
Oh, God. Being outside. I'd say that's been probably the best thing about COVID, honestly, is like before it happened, being in Iowa, like I don't know, I would travel a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So whenever I had free time, I would just go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And like COVID hasn't really allowed that to happen. So it's really given me an opportunity to like get to know the immediate surroundings a lot more intimately. And so just, being outside, going for walks, just playing with the animals, gardening, that sort of thing has really been the thing.
What's your garden like? Are you a flower gardener or a vegetable gardener? Or
definitely a vegetable gardener mostly. So slowly but surely we have decommissioned pretty much the entire backyard and turned it into food production. So I think we grew around 400 pounds of food last year out back. And then our front yard, we've been kind of taking apart and turning into native prairie plants. So there are a lot of flowers out there, but there's also a lot of like native grasses and things like that.
So you're on a big plot, are you?
Yeah, pretty big for being in town. Pretty big.
Wow, lovely.
It's lovely. It is.
So what kind of vegetables did you grow?
Oh my gosh. Well, my greatest triumph was a sweet potato. We had tried growing potatoes and we had, kind of lukewarm success. We got some potatoes and we were like, okay, cool. But then I had a sweet potato inside that was just, I had forgotten about it. It was starting to sprout. And I figured, I'll just throw it in the ground and see what happens. Sweet potatoes is what happened. Like It grew so many sweet potatoes. It was amazing. I think we got, I can't remember, like maybe 30 pounds or something like that of sweet potatoes.
Oh, love it. I love sweet potatoes. I don't think they grow here, even in a tunnel.
Oh, really? Too cold there?
Yeah. And I've had no luck with potatoes. We've grown them once and never had, no matter what we did. So I've given up. So I just buy them from my friend Sinead, who's an organic farmer up the road.
Yeah, I don't understand why it's so hard. I'm like, what's happening? Potatoes. Why is it like this? But yeah.
No, but sweet potatoes are magic.
Oh my gosh. They were great. And I learned that you can eat the greens, which I didn't know, but apparently you can eat the greens. Kind of has a bit of a spinach sort of taste.
Because they're not potatoes. So they're not, what do you call them?
Like a nightshade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, wonderful. Sweet potato fries. Yes, Stephanie, I absolutely love them. Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
And potatoes don't like too wet soil. Yeah. And where do they grow, Lisa? In Ireland. And of course, they're not native here. So Walter Raleigh brought them to Ireland. They came from Peru.
Yeah.
Somebody said, how can you not grow potatoes in Ireland? Yes, that's a mystery. But we were in Peru in 2009, and I was just blown away by the different species of potatoes, shapes, blue potatoes, pink ones, white ones, just incredible. All growing up, on the slopes of the Andes, just amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. Like we did manage to grow some purple potatoes. We didn't get a very prolific crop, but they were really beautiful. They were purple even on the inside. Lovely.
Well, I bought 2 days ago or last week 2 packets of what you'd call potato chips, crisps we call them.
Oh, sure.
They were, so there was there were blue, red, and the normal white ones. And I thought, oh my goodness! And these aren't stained by beetroot. These
Yeah, that's awesome.
they were lovely, just amazing. So, Karen, with global warming, we may be able to grow sweet potatoes in the UK.
True.
My neighbor from Vietnam grows them in a greenhouse and steams the green tops. Okay, so I have a polytunnel. Maybe. And then Peru potatoes are very hardy. Well, they're no, they weren't Peru potatoes. They were Irish potatoes I was trying to grow. Anyway, so I've given up, and I'm going to allow other people to do that, and then I can share in their produce.
Yeah. What do you have the most success with? Like, what grows well for you?
Tomatoes.
Good. Yeah, me too.
After Howard died, I have a tunnel, but I just didn't have the energy because I have a big garden. I couldn't manage growing vegetables, traveling, working, managing what I do. So, but then with COVID, I started harvesting my herb. I do a lot of herbs. So either drying them for teas and making tinctures. But then last year and this year, tomatoes, and I was still harvesting my last tomatoes last January. So I think I have some now. They'll still be green. I can take them in to, because we haven't had any frost yet. So I need to do that tomorrow, the last day of the year, to pick some. And Tim Devaney, best potatoes I've ever tasted were from Wexford. Wexford people are very biased. They think they have the best potatoes. I'm not so sure, but anyway, I'll give it to you. Boiled sprinkle of salt. So anyway, okay. So Eimear says, I can share much skill in growing such. With sweet potatoes, you have to cut the actual tuber and standard in water until it grows shoots, and then you take the shoots off and you plant them once they start to grow. Ooh. Oh no. Okay. So that's going to be next spring. I don't know what, we have such a short growing season here.
When can you start putting things out?
Well, the traditional date to sow potatoes would be St. Patrick's Day. That would be the spring equinox.
Yep.
But I imagine that'd still be too cold for sweet potatoes. So maybe even start getting the shoots and the roots growing and then put them in. Oh, wonderful. Nice. So this is a great I love when people come in with ideas into the chat.
Yes, I'm like, OBOD garden talk. Let's do it.
Right. And there's other things I can't remember, but I've had tips from here that I've gone and followed up and used. So thank you very much. Oh, we can't put the veggies out until May 20th, but then they go really fast. That's in Canada.
Yeah.
Well, you see, we can still get frost here in May. So that's what you're talking about, really. And then we have a short growing season because of the sun. But anyway.
Yeah, that's about the time for us too, is in May we can put things out, and then who knows when we'll get frost. Sometimes it's before Samhain even. So
we've had very little. We've had some weeks back, but like 12 degrees here centigrade and 16 in London. What's happening? But I know we're going to be tougher, coming, because sometimes we'll get, well, it was a few years ago. I remember being it was 2018. Yeah. I went over for a night to London to go to the Harry Potter exhibition. Philip was giving a talk there, and with Ronald Hutton and it's gone for me. Anyway, I was staying with Philip and Stephanie, but then the snow hit and the airport in Dublin was closed. Wow. So I was stranded there for 5 days, and that was March, so couldn't move. So who knows? And Rising of 1848 failed in Ireland in May because of snow.
Right.
So
who knows?
Exactly. Anyway, so when you think of when you are where we're living to get how, or the state of the world, what concerns do you have now about the modern world?
The rise of fascism.
Okay.
That is probably, I am concerned about climate change. And I do think we are in for some real, climactic problems. But like seeing this kind of increased pull toward fascism, I guess. I really can't think of another word for it. Like kind of the rise of this sort of racist, homophobic, sexist, sort of right-wing militancy. It's pretty disconcerting. Like, I gotta be honest. We joke about like having to make like an overland escape or something, but it's also kind of not a joke, you know.
It's not.
Like we live in a place that is, this town is not especially conservative, but around us there are definitely people who are you know, leaning in that direction. We live right near one of the largest like gun manufacturers.
Okay.
You know, there's just like there are a lot of like very armed people, and those people who have a lot of armaments are not especially fond of people like myself. So, you know, it does trouble me, like, to think about the possibility of, you know, conflicts like that kicking off.
I mean, we don't have, well, we don't have guns here. I mean, we do have guns, obviously. Criminals do, and you get a license. But, I mean, do you see people with guns wearing them going down the street past you?
No, not too much here. Not as much as I have in other places, but there's just a knowledge that, like, you know, that this place is nearby. There are people who wear, you know, t-shirts with images of guns on them to kind of represent that they're like, I love guns or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. And sometimes the question enters my mind, like, should I get a gun? Like, would it be smart? Would it be wise? Or would it just increase the danger of my own existence? Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. Like, but at the point where you're wondering that to yourself, I feel like you do have to be concerned. Like,
Philip says that's frightening, and I think so, because I've never been in a situation where I thought, would I be? My bias for me is I wouldn't have a gun simply because I wouldn't be able to use it, so it'd be useless to me to defend myself. And then if I have one, I'm more likely to get shot. All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally.
But I haven't been confronted with the possible need to have it. So I think, you know, I'm listening to you, and it's kind of, I'm horrified that you have to, you know, that you don't feel safe enough that's there. It's very, very concerning.
I mean, like, certainly when January 6th was happening, I was like, oh shit, I should have got a gun.
Okay.
You know, like, when I was watching that unfold, I was like, oh, these guys are serious. Like, they are trying to take over the country, like, for real right now. But then, you know, nothing really came of it. So then you kind of sink back and say, like, oh, well, perhaps I was overreacting or whatever. But
and I suppose it's a very understandable reaction, and it's about being just aware. And well, you see, there's a difference between if you're driving a car and you're just aware of dangers, so you always look in the mirror and you indicate and you keep within a speed limit, etc., etc. And that's a healthy way of being. But if you're constantly, you know, if you're in a really stressed on a highway,
yeah,
living, that's a very different way to be.
Totally.
So it's scary to see, and I've hidden myself and my family from the militia trend. We've stayed home as much as possible over the last few years. I do see that naive movement starting to die off. I live in a deep red state, and even here things are starting to lighten up. Let's hope.
Good.
If all guns shoot healing hugs and joyful flowers, now wouldn't that be lovely? And somebody says they're scared. This is about who the people are. Wait a second. You know, that people are frightened. And that's why, you know, like, it's their backlash because the previously dominated are saying no more.
And absolutely.
And so then, now we have a real reason to up our antipathy towards people who are different. And that's a scary place. Yeah. And then somebody says, this is Jamie, there are a lot of people who conceal carry in my area. I totally feel you on that's concern. Okay. So, and then our state just passed a law where you no longer have to have a gun permit and you can legally carry pretty much anywhere. It's scary. Lost a lot of friends because of the political divide. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's really, really sad. Losing friends because, oh, yeah. So it's
yeah, I mean, and being a teacher, even, like, it's crazy to say, but like, that can be nerve-wracking too. Like, less so at this school, because I feel like this school, the personality of the students here is much more mellow.
okay.
But when I was at University of Oregon, it was a very large state university. I would sometimes lecture in front of like 200, 300 people. And the feeling always was like, here you are at the bottom of a lecture hall. There's, and I'm like, if someone really didn't like what I had to say, it wouldn't be that hard. And that's kind of just a reality that I think teachers are dealing with. Like, there are not just at universities and colleges, but like everywhere, because the prevalence of like people who are just willing to take guns and shoot.
I'm just horrified because I've taught at third level, and I know I've gotten students riled up about things I might have said.
Oh, yeah.
The idea, and that would be just it, but never ever considered my physical safety. I never had to. It's mind blowing to think that you have to do that in your job.
Yeah.
And that somebody who doesn't like what you say can be offended enough to think, okay, my life is threatened, or this threatens my existence, and I need to pull a gun is it's disturbing.
Truly.
Yeah. Well, may you be safe. May you always be safe.
Thank you.
Because it's like
you and everyone else out there.
I suppose even, with the current situation and the divisiveness with this pandemic that it's brought, how we may sometimes silence ourselves or self-censor in order to avoid some nasty interactions with people. So it's so you're getting a lot of reaction here. Agreed, Jules. The education establishments are the most terrifying places to be in America. And how crazy is that? Anne, in Canada, teachers always live with the reality of being vulnerable in this way. I think sometimes the rest of society doesn't imagine that this is the case. Yeah. And then Leo, who's as a British primary teacher, I find it so weird that you have to consider guns at school. Yeah. And then Salve, growing up as children in Northern Ireland around country lanes and city streets, we all endured close-up exposure to weapons being discharged. It was the norm. On 30, it says we even had to start doing lockdown practices in the school for primary and secondary schools. Oh, I don't know. It's just, it's crazy. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. It's so troubling because you watch, like, the political situation is just stymied. They're like, oh, well, we can't do anything about it because we have the Second Amendment, and like, sorry, we just can't. But one of the ways that the system deals with it is to then try to sell us products to defend ourselves with, like bulletproof backpacks and stuff like that for kids. And I'm like, at the point at which this is what we're doing, you would think we would say like, perhaps we need to transform this system or change it in some kind of way. But
I mean, that sounds crazy, having bulletproof vests for children. It's like, well, it's up to the children to defend themselves and protect themselves against someone's right to bear arms.
Yeah. or the teachers, or yeah, the janitorial staff, they're gonna go out and check and make sure there's no gunmen. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, the custodial staff has to do this. This is just insane. It's insane. But yeah.
Okay, we have brought the mood down beautifully. That is no, this is good. All moods are welcome here. So, what gives you hope?
I mean, I think that is one of the upsides of being a teacher, though, is that you're constantly in contact with like younger people. who haven't been like brought down by the world entirely yet. So they're like, you know, they still have a lot of fight in them, and like they're optimistic about things. And so I think that's positive, you know, like to have an opportunity to help them is very nice. And hopefully I'm not like instilling in them that there is no hope, because I wouldn't want to do that. But I also think I get a lot of hope from watching just Indigenous peoples, like knowing about Indigenous movements and having, you know, worked alongside some Indigenous movements, just getting a sense of like, you know, a fight may take a very long time. Mm-hmm. And just because you lose like a particular fight doesn't mean that the battle is over, you know, like you're still in it. And like, if you're committed to your values and you keep pushing for those things, like that, you won't be brought down, or you can't be brought down by these losses along the way, no matter how terrible they might be. So I think that helps.
I think your students are fortunate. So they have you telling them what it is, how it is, and not whitewashing it or sweetening everything up and just covering everything in glitter. And then hopefully that there's somehow, when people are awaken, I don't use the word woke, but awaken, that begin to think and be inspired to, okay, that's wrong. Let me think differently. Let me behave differently. And then when you have a critical mass, then a bit like knowing your neighbors in the street, creating that community. I think there's hope. Leah says, what gives me hope to the minute? Imulk, the hope of spring and snowdrops.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Anne says, me too. This is in relation to your comment about Indigenous peoples. Indigenous colleagues and friends have been the most inspiring for me too. I'm often humbled by their courage and incredible resilience. Jules, somebody asked a question. Let me see. Where are we? Do you have an end of year, because we're coming to the end of our talk, do you have an end of year ritual, a review of what worked and what to let go of?
I mean, I usually do that sort of thing around Samhain.
Okay.
I think, like, I definitely tend to consult the oracle around Samhain to try to guide me, like, for the time coming ahead, like, you know, what would be the best things for me to focus on for the next cycle. And so I kind of take my guidance from there to try to figure things out.
Lovely. So you get a lot of people agreeing with you here. Billy says, agree. I have a 5-year-old and a number of nieces and nephews under 21. Seeing and hearing them definitely gives me hope. And I know we had Ellie Tallett, was one of my earlier guests when I started doing these chats. And she talked about, you know, nurturing the saplings, and that, you know, you're teaching saplings.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I think they, you know, are a great source of hope amongst all of this madness. And it only takes one little candle, one little light in darkness to actually make a huge, to make an impact. Salve says, Jules, I will set strong, prayerful heart intentions for you and include you in my daily focus. May you be strong and blessed in your courage and conviction in all that you do for the children.
Oh, thank you so much.
Appreciate that. Can't kill the spirit. Spirit is like, this is from Lisa. Can't kill the spirit. Spirit is like a mountain, old and strong, and it goes on and on and on. Wonderful. So, Sav says snowdrops are just peeking up here.
Ooh.
Oh, I have to go out and look because I didn't notice anything last week. So it'll be, I must have a look. I think it's probably colder up north. It's probably too mild down here for the snowdrops to come yet. Mm-hmm. So usually my last question is, or two parts to the question. What is your favorite season of the year, and what is your favorite ceremony in the Wheel of the Year to celebrate?
I don't know. I always flip-flop between fall and spring, but I definitely am the person for the transition points. Like, I love the turning points. Probably Samhain. Probably like so many people, Samhain's like my favorite. It's like that one time of year where everybody is celebrating with me, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
So I find that really hysterical and delightful. You know, because like in the US, Halloween is a big thing. Like people are really into it. And I love that. I'm like, yes, join me. Join me. Let's run in the streets and have a lot of fun. Yeah, so I would say that's definitely my favorite. I love all the ancestral stuff, but I also really love seeing other people get into it, even if they don't know what they're into.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Jules, it's been an absolute joy talking to you. And I look forward to seeing you, if I don't see you, probably in Ireland. Well, who knows when all this is over, when we can. There's a comment from Danuta. Danuta's in Australia. Thank you for sharing both the beauty and challenges of being a teacher. I'm always inspired by the vision and wisdom of the young people I meet. It's lovely to say that. Lovely to hear older people talking about, talking about young people in such a positive way. Because I remember when I was younger, my parents' generation were always complaining about our generation, how awful we were and self-centered. And every older generation has said it about the younger one. And it's just lovely for adults who work with young people to be able to appreciate that and to see, what is it? Look low under the foliage for them. Oh, that's for the
snowdrops.
You're thinking for young, hopeful children. Snowdrops. Okay, that's just lovely. So anyway, thank you so much, Jules. It's just been a joy talking to you, and great comments here from our viewers. So I'm just going to send you backstage, and then we will look at the comments because we didn't get to read all of them. So thank you so much. And so Ferdiet says, it's been wonderful listening to you both chat, and great way to end 2021, a year many of us are happy to see the back of. Absolutely. And I'm sure you are too, Ferdiet. Yes, it's tomorrow's New Year's Eve. So yeah. I'm going to wish you all the best for. Oh, yes. We can hear her.
Oh, there she is. She's wishing you all a good 2022.
Oh, so sweet. Okay. So I'll back. We'll talk to you in a minute. We'll go back and look at I'll just say goodbye to you, everybody. So thank you all so much for joining us today and for your comments. And it's just been wonderful. And so I wish you all a good new year. I hope that you enjoyed last weekend. Those of you who celebrate Christmas, either spiritually or culturally, or just had to put up with it because of where you live. And just wish you all the best for 2022. Who knows what it may bring, but some resolution, I hope, some more compassion and some more love and strength and unity among us all. So I shall see you next year. That will be this time next week. So Aflín, Fuiwasha, Yiv Galer, Happy New Year to you all. And see you next week, where I'll be introducing you to another guest. So until then, Slán go fóill.